Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to Voices of the Transition, Climate Change, Communication for a Sustainable Future. That's an event that wants to propose a journey through the challenge of communicating climate change in many different ways, trying to keep together science and arts and data visualization, music, theater, and so on. This event takes place in a moment that's particularly interesting. We know that these days have been the days of the Youth for Climate initiative here in Milan. So we had more than 400 delegates from all over the world that have been meeting to draft a document. We will be discussing that in a minute. And we also know that it's opening the pre-COP 26. So we're getting ready to get the next step of negotiation, looking ahead at the COP26 that will take place in Glasgow. My name is Elisabetta Tola. I'm a science journalist. I'm the host of a daily program at Rai Radio 3 Scienza, and I'm also the managing editor of Ilbo Live. So today I will be the host for this afternoon and for you, and I will be interviewing a number of people, and we will be talking together and going through different aspects of the challenge of communicating climate change. Voices of the Transition is an initiative by the CMCC, the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. It's the center that develops advanced multidisciplinary research into climate change science, but also is focusing for many years now in trying to improve the communication of climate change and connect the science that's been done around climate change with what's happening in people's life, so the needs and the expectation of the society that needs to be fulfilled and discussed in order to face the climate crisis that we are dealing with. The Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change has decided to put together a number of initiatives related to communication, and the one we're presenting today is one of them, and it's the Climate Change Communication Award, Rebecca Balestra, and the prize ceremony will conclude our afternoon together. So on this note, I will leave the floor to Professor Carlo Carraro, the University of Ca' Fosca di Venezia, strategic advisor for the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, for an opening address. Carlo Carraro is connected in video with us.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome all of you, those who are in Milan now and those who are listening and viewing us through the web. I'm very pleased and honored to open this event, Voices of the Transition, for at least two reasons. The first one, because this is one of the main important side events of pre-COP26, and its focus on communication is particularly important. We all know that the transition to a zero-carbon economy requires many different things: technological innovation, large investments, appropriate domestic policies, international cooperation. And today, various talks will give us ideas and insights on all these issues. But the transition to a zero-carbon economy requires a mindset change and a cultural innovation. And to this end, communication is crucial. And that's why inclusion, awareness, participation are cornerstones of an effective and rapid climate transition. And that's why we launched the Maria Rebecca Balestra Award to further stimulate the awareness about the challenge of climate change. But there is a second reason, and this is exactly what related to what I'm saying. This event is the occasion to present the winner of CMCC Rebecca Balestra Award. The goal of the award is certainly to recognize the many efforts to create awareness of climate change threats and inclusion in climate change policy in many countries worldwide. But there is another goal, and the goal is, and this is the one which is closest to me, is to recognize the work and efforts of a friend and artist, Maria Rebecca Balestra, who devoted his creativity and his life to promote awareness and actions on climate change. let me recall a few occasions in which I had the chance to work with Rebecca. The first time was at the Festival of Earth that she organized with my university, University of Venice, and the Prince Albert Foundation. The second one was the last edition of the Best Climate Solution Award. In the year in which it was devoted to communication, we worked on adaptation, energy poverty, finance, urban planning. But that year we worked with Rebecca, and the success of that edition was the seed upon which we have been building this new communication award. So this award is dedicated to the memory of Rebecca, because what she did is an example for all of us, and we want to continue the work that she did for many years. And to this end, let me thank the international jury, Mike Favetta, Giuseppe La Spada, Michael Mann, Katrina Seia, and Mira Silva. They reviewed a lot of projects, 108 projects selected out of 150 applications. You will know the winner later on at the end of the first part of this event. There will also be two more prizes awarded in cooperation with Radio Trescenza, and I'm also grateful to all colleagues from Radio Trescenza. And again, you will know the winners later on. The participation to these awards has been exceptional. From all over the world, there were ideas, experiences, initiatives that were submitted for the award. And I believe that the visibility of what we are doing will be further increased by this event. Let me thank Carbon Sync, because for the support they gave you to this award, the CMCC communication staff for the excellent organization. As you know, CMCC is the leading Italian center on climate change, and we do a lot of things on science, but science without impact is not what we want to pursue. Science with impact goes through events like the one today and the award that we launched months ago. So let me conclude. We need to listen to a lot of very interesting speakers. This event will continue with talks and lectures, and then at the end with the prize dedicated to Maria Rebecca Balestra, and you will know the winner, and above all, the many nice ideas that will stimulate further ideas for the coming edition next year of the same communication award. Thank you all, and I wish you a nice afternoon.
Thank you, Professor Carraro, for this introduction. And so now we start our conversation with the different guests, and I'm calling Hur Ali, a delegate from the Youth for Climate COP from the United Arab Emirates. Welcome, Hur. You can stay there. It's really a pleasure to welcome one of the delegates from the Youth for Climate. We know it's a novelty. It's been an event where many of us have been following these days to see how you were working, what was coming out of there. Of course, for the past few years, we've been looking with a huge interest to the crowds of young people around the world who have been finally, I have to say, moving us as well to become more aware of the big issue of the climate crisis and its consequences for the entire world. So, Hur, first of all, how was the atmosphere? You're just like almost at the end of it. How was this particular event for you?
So today was the end, we can say, of Youth for Climate event, but definitely not the end of the action that's going to be done. And the atmosphere, to be honest, was more than amazing. I really, really loved it because, you know, it's people from all around the world, and you get to connect with them, to network with them, and just getting to hear about all these perspectives from all around the world is really fascinating, because usually we're in the UAE, we would, hear about Gulf countries around us, but hearing people like talking to me from Africa, from other parts of Asia, from Europe, from America, it's just really nice. And I feel you can get a lot from it.
Can you tell us a little bit how you worked? Because we know you've been working in different working groups to draft this document. How did it go?
So there are 4 working groups, and I was in the second one, which is sustainable recovery, a huge field of interest of mine, and specifically in the subgroup of tourism. And I come from the UAE, from Dubai, and tourism is just a huge industry back there. So we had a lot to add on. We had a 0 draft that we initially were doing edits on and adding to. So we were taking into consideration the developed countries, the developing countries, so that our proposal would be inclusive of all of the countries that are going to be taking part in it.
And what do you think, in terms of the impact of the work you've been doing? Of course, this is a step. It's not, as you said, the final step. It's actually a very important step, but looking forward, what kind of impact you think you might concretely have?
Like today, after hearing all the ministers that were there, the president was there, the prime minister as well, I think so much work is going to happen, and it's definitely the maybe beginning of change, because it added like a lot of value seeing the ministers being there from all around the world, because like them hearing us, listening to us, and engaging directly with us has added like so much empowerment plus motivation to go on, and that our voices are heard and something's going to happen.
Do you have the impression that you have enough connection with the science world on one side, the policy world on the other? Do you get real support? Or I know these days we've been hearing a lot about the blah, blah, blah discussion about how much of this is the blah, 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 and how much is actually concrete action from your point of view.
So I think for the most part, this is what we're going to see after the conference and like after what's going to happen, because we've got so many promises from many leaders, and like hoping for the best in COP and even COI 16 that's going to be in Glasgow.
Okay, so what's the next step for you now?
So now what I mainly want to do is go back to my country, tell them about all my insights, all of the things that I have seen, because we are working on putting out youth more in decision making on like a local or a national level. So with Expo as well going on, like many volunteers are there and we can do a lot. Climate Week is coming up, and for sure our insights would be there, and the messages that we want to share would be communicated there.
One last question, and then we know she has to go back because she has a flight to catch, so a plane to catch. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was the importance also to understand, to become aware of the differences of the impact of the crisis in different countries. Do you think that, are we becoming more aware of these inequalities and differences of impact, or are we still have a lot to work to do to get there and to understand exactly what we should do moving forward?
So definitely there is a lot of work that has to be done, but we can see progress. For example, like just on talking about myself, I have seen these so many new perspectives that are like eye-opening, to be honest. And coming from a financially, we can say, stable country, talking to other people from developing countries that are like maybe have vulnerable communities, it is really nice to just have these conversations with them and talk about how differently we can view things. So I found it really interesting, and we are definitely on the way of a more of climate conscious society.
Thank you, Hur Ali, and we want to wish her good flight back. So a safe trip back home, and we hope to see you again in one of the next opportunities for discussion.
For sure, looking forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We have to exchange microphones. Sorry, there are strict rules to be followed. So I'm calling now Massimo Tavoni. We're going to get into a discussion on how science can actually help us understand what's happening and also communicate what's happening to different type of audiences. So Massimo Tavoni is one of the authors of the IPCC reports, the fifth and sixth. So it's very important to have him here today to understand exactly not only how these reports are drafted and organized, but mainly how we can actually make the best use of them to understand what's happening in the future scenario. It's from the Resources for the Future, CMCC, European Institute on Economics and the Environment, and the director as well of the EIEE. Massimo, welcome. See, yeah, you can sit there. Let me just get. Okay, so my first question for Massimo Tavoni is really to help us understand what is a climate scenario. We've been discussing very often about the scenario. The report gives us the scenarios. Many scientific papers are based on scenarios. How do we understand what it means to draft and look in a future scenario?
So thanks, Elisabetta, and welcome everyone. I think this is indeed science and science of science, in the sense that it brings together different groups trying to use a common language, and the common language is that of scenarios. So IPCC has 3 working groups. Have you seen the first working group released its latest report last summer in the 6th assessment report? Second and third working group will come out mid next year. And the language that they use between themselves is that of scenarios. Scenarios are imaginations of futures, and their consequences, mostly in terms of climate change, but also in terms of consequences for society, for health, for well-being, for energy, for technologies, for a lot of things.
So how difficult, I know this is a very silly question, but that's what we very often ask from the outside of the science world, how difficult it is to actually draft a scenario or draw a scenario, especially when we're looking long-term in the future.
Yeah, obviously we are looking very long-term, so it's not that someone tomorrow is going to check the weather forecast and whether they're good or not, and you're going to be criticized. Luckily, that's not happening, so we're going to be criticized every 7 years or so, but we have to look at least for this century, and that is a challenge. Now, how we do it, we are scientists, so we're very boring. We use data and a very empirical approach. So we use data to try to think about futures because we have been trained to work on data, on numbers, on models. And we use those to make projections for the future. And we recognize that if you use the past data, we can only imagine certain futures. But what we are actually looking at is the future which is very different from the past. And so that is where things becomes much more complicated. How can we imagine futures which are different from the past if the only data that we have are the data from the past?
Somehow you need, I'm pretty sure it's all strongly data-based, but also you need somehow a portion of imagination.
Yeah, exactly, because the data can bring you forward only by looking at the past, and that's something we don't want to do. So how do we do it? We do it some way. I think we need help, and this community can help. Let me tell you how we do it. We look at data, we look at histories of things which have happened historically, which could be useful in understanding possible futures. Obviously, there are some in the past that will come back and can be used to understand a different future. We ask people to think about the future. So we ask experts, what is your opinion about the future? Sometimes they get it right, often they get it wrong. Ultimately, we are not exactly and only looking about something which is necessarily right in the sense of doing a right projection, because we cannot forecast 100 years. What we are interested in is thinking what would be the consequences of certain futures. And then we imagine many different futures, and for each of these different futures we say, okay, What will be the challenges? What will be the consequences?
So from your point of view as a scientist, what do people can take out of these scenarios? How can they translate a scenario in something practical, or giving also indication for policies, but also for future developments at local community level?
I think now, I mean, these scenarios are used, we generate them, then a lot of people take them, do a lot of incredible things, including turning those scenarios in something that people can understand, not just scientists. So then, CMCC just released the scenarios for the future temperatures in certain cities in the country. What will be the weather in Milan, or the climate in Milan down the road. This is something people can relate to very well when you discuss things that people understand and relate every day. There are many ways to visualize and help people understand this complex information. And people working in art, design, and data visualization, not just scientists necessarily, but also more on the visualization side, have helped make tremendous use of scenarios, which are now used everywhere.
Yeah, we will have a lot of possibility to taste different ways of using this data in this afternoon. But Massimo Tavoni, there is also the point of how much these scenarios have become, I don't want to say common in discussion outside of the science world, but anyway, how did you see along the last few years the scene of climate communication changing? Have you seen awareness raising or not, and how people are reacting now compared to a few years ago?
I think the awareness has raised, that's pretty clear from everything that we hear today, the participation of the institutions, the people in the streets of the Fridays for the Future, including tomorrow's Friday. So I think that has changed a lot, and that obviously has changed, especially among the young people, who are also the quickest to understand even complex information because they are used to that. So that has changed a lot, and it's changed as our job as well to try to perceive futures. I always say, we are depicting bad futures to, in a way, also make people understand about the consequences of the climate crisis if we do not work on it. What we should also do, and that's more difficult, at least I can see that from a science communication perspective. What is more difficult is how to make people think about a good future. So what would be the Earth in 20, 30 years from now when it's going to be clean? Hopefully it's going to be clean. If you think about that future and you try to think about yourself in that future, it's going to become very natural to think that you don't want to go back to now. And in that way, it's much easier for us also to get the message across, and also I think for policymakers to decide on ambitious policies.
Yeah, in a way, I think it's also interesting to see how scientists have been trying to communicate this data and all the research done for at least 30 years now, maybe even a little bit more about what's happening. And the fact that the target audience that is actually listening more are the younger people and the people who actually started reacting. Did that provide for you an interesting new group of people to relate to, or are there connection between the science and community and all of these younger, let's say, and active players in the field of the fight to climate crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a professor at the university, so I teach, I'm a teacher. And in that role, I think that's where I saw the most changing. And I also see the most interesting things happening. So the students are coming up and are asking for thesis, for work, what can we do, what job opportunities, can I do research, if it's not research, what shall I do? And I can tell you universities sometimes are a bit conservative places by the way they are designed. And in a way, it has been the demand of the students to know more about these topics, which has pushed and forced the universities to actually open up more research topics and more teaching activities on climate change. And it's still not there in many Italian universities. It's still lacking quite a lot. And this has changed a lot. And I think this is most very important news, obviously, because these are the young students who are graduating these days, and obviously will be the ones which are going to decide for the future as well, hopefully.
And on this, maybe it's a very strange question to pose to a scientist, but how important it is art or literature, music, other forms of communication? Again, I always like to quote the Great Derangement by Amitav Ghosh saying, we haven't looked enough, and Ghosh has been saying for many years now that literature should focus more, for example, on the big story of climate change and make it a protagonist of a lot of the work that's been done in the creative process. So how important it is from your point of view, the fact that, for example, this becomes a theme discussed in books, in arts, and everywhere else?
I mean, this is very important just because, as I said before, we need that as well. Otherwise, we keep thinking like that. I was looking at that thing. We keep thinking and going in circles because that's our approach. I mean, an artist can come, or a fiction writer can come and just move you along those lines and just put you in a completely different world very easily through a narrative. That's what writers are good at and artists are good at, in essentially putting yourself outside your thinking box. And I think that's where we really need help. And in the past, I mean, the fiction, obviously science fiction has a long tradition, even longer than, actually much longer than climate science. And so futures very different from today's have been imagined for a long time. Now, to make them successful, the fiction writers have typically used the two extremes, either very dystopian futures, very bad, very unequal, or very utopian futures. And I think for us, what we need is also something in between. Maybe it's not going to sell a lot of books, but it's something that is going to help us tremendously in trying to show that the road to a climate neutral society, a climate safe society, is going to be bumpy, but it's going to bring us definitely towards a much better place. And I think that's also for us, in search of creativity and input, that's where we might actually profit the most and get out of with better scenarios, more interesting, more fun, more engaging as well.
So that's my last question, Massimo Tavoni. Do you see the scientific community getting more into this? I mean, I'm pretty sure that for many years it was very much the communication was based on data and scientific facts. And as a journalist, I got this experience a lot, that we were trying to translate the documents and make sure that, for example, our newspapers or radio or whatever would buy this possibility of discussing this and trying to find a way to make it usable or interesting, appealing for the people. Do you think it's also useful for the scientific community, the fact of having different ways of telling the story?
So this is a double-edged sword. Yeah. Finally, the journals want to hear what we have to say. So let's talk to them, and let's talk to them as much as we can and communicate as much as you can, social media, newspapers, and so forth. On the other hand, we are scientists first and foremost. So integrity is what we should strive for. And it's this thin balance between our private lives as citizens, participating maybe actively in civil society causes on climate change, or maybe not, and as a scientist who are trying to do work which is supposed to be as robust and impartial as neutral as possible. And so we have to find that balance, and it's not easy to find. I would say the scientific community has been quite good in moving towards being able to communicate more fully what they had to say, not being afraid of doing so, as was in the past because of the uncertainties. You know, we always think also, you know, that we have, I mean, most scientists have imposter syndromes. They think that they do not deserve to be there because they are not good enough. That's what is typical characteristics. So that is being moved a little bit, and now a lot of scientists are very, they speak very openly about it. It's just that we have to be careful not crossing too many lines at some point. That's also my word of concern at the end.
Okay, so it's a challenge in the challenge, basically. Okay, thank you, Massimo Tavoni. Thank you for helping us understanding also from the point of view of someone who's working in the scientific community and field and realm, how do we try to mix, but also in a proper way, get the scientific information out in different ways. So thank you again for being with us.
And thanks to everyone listening. Thank you.
So now we're going to see one way of communicating science with data visualization, with data information. And we're going to connect with Angela Morelli. Angela Morelli is an award-winning Italian information designer, but she's based in Norway, in Oslo. She's the CEO and co-founder of the Info Design Lab. She's been collaborating with many organizations, many institutions, and also with the IPCC, the European Environment Agency, the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, and many more, in trying to find ways to make sure that data are visualized and communicated in a way that it's not only nice to look at, but particularly it's actually helping people to become part of the process, so to understand and to enter in the process. So I will leave the floor to Angela. She's connected with us. Good afternoon, Angela.
Good afternoon.
The floor is... Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks a lot. Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Elisabetta, and hello, everybody. It is an honor to be with you today. My name is Angela Morelli, and I am an information designer, and I run Info Design Lab, a socially conscious information design firm. So basically, we help companies and organizations turn complex data into meaningful narratives, unique visualizations, and compelling messages. We work with scientists and activists, with the public and private sector, with universities and the media. We teach a lot and run courses, and most of the time the goal of our projects is to co-design visualizations that make complex knowledge more accessible to wider audiences, empowering specialists and non-specialists to make informed decisions about the big challenges we face as a society, from education to health, from social justice to climate change. And when about 15 years ago, I started diving into climate science, and I understood the urgency of environmental issues and the importance of critical thinking, I decided that I would knock on the door of research organizations advocating for a new way of visualizing data in a design-driven way, in a human-centered way. And most of the time, nobody would answer my call. But very few times they would, and those who have answered have been pioneers in contributing to a changing culture that goes from a way of working that is order and delivery to a way of working that is design-driven. What do I mean by design-driven? If there is one rule or metric that is increasingly important for us, is participation, especially when we design information for decision-making or for high-level negotiations. There are so many different actors involved in the design process, so many scientists or experts from different disciplines, and so many users with different needs, that orchestrating that participation is one of the most important things of all. And that is why a lot of our work does not happen behind a computer screen, not anymore. It consists of mastering the data, interviewing stakeholders to understand their needs, collaborating with other designers, developers, and cognitive scientists. The word co-design is probably the best word to describe the way we work. We co-design with our audience, and most importantly, we co-design with the scientists and the content experts. We borrow tools from systemic design, service design, cognitive science, and we bring them into the information design and data visualization space. The goal is to empower audiences to see patterns and to move from data to knowledge and action. And if we have to use a diagram to visualize the journey from data to action, we could say that on one side we have the audience, and reaching the mind of our audience is for us the most important thing of all. Learning how the audience will use and receive the information and understanding the context in which the information will be processed is key for the design process. And on the other side, we have the authors of the data, we have the scientists, and listening to their needs and ideas is equally important. As designers, we need to dive into the content with the guidance of the content experts, and we need to build a deep and shared understanding of the nature of the data and the science that underpins it. So these two actors are the most important players if our goal is to turn data into information, presenting it in a way that becomes knowledge in the mind of the users and hopefully help make important decisions and ultimately inspire change. Now, the process from data to change that on the diagram looks so neat, in reality looks more like this. It is not linear, it is not tidy and neat at all for different reasons. First, because of the collaborative and iterative nature of the design process that involves different users and scientists and designers and stakeholders, and because it is not a plug and play process. We have to adapt to the challenges and projects we deal with. Second, because cognition is complex. Information is mediated by the human brain. It's not the message that goes into the brain, but the interpretation of that message and how it is encoded. Third, because science tells us that as human beings, we assess how the information we receive is going to affect our lives, our context, our values, and the links to the social groups we belong to. And when information threatens those values, we struggle accepting the information even if there is scientific evidence behind it. And fourth, because even if the information is communicated properly, even if we understand it, even if we make the right decisions, we might not be able to act because there are barriers out there that prevent us from doing so. And as designers, we need to be aware of those barriers. And these are some of the projects that we've worked on: the visualization of the Norwegian environmental targets and design of a platform to navigate through those targets, the design of a timeline that explains the history of the 1.5 target, showing that the rise of fame of the target is built on years of careful groundwork by people who share a profound precariousness to the adverse effects of climate change. The visualization of the global water footprint of humanity, and the design of resources to visualize how much water is embedded in what we eat, the interactive evidence to decision framework, which is a system designed to help groups of people use evidence in a structured and transparent way to inform decisions in the context of health recommendations. And at times, we have been working on projects that put us on a very steep learning curve. An example is working with people who cannot afford to fail, activists around the world who live in danger for their lives, suppressed by regimes, or fight climate justice. When working on extreme projects like these ones, the learning points become very evident, and a lot of the noise in the work we do is taken out from the equation, and you are left with the essence of what really matters. And another extreme collaboration with a steep learning curve is the collaboration with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, the United Nations body that assesses the science related to climate change. Now, in the last 4 years, we have been responsible for the visualizations of the summaries for policymakers of 3 reports: the report on global warming of 1.5 that was approved in 2019, the report on climate change and land that was approved in 2019, and the report on the physical science basis, which is the Working Group 1 contribution to the AR6 cycle approved in August 2021. Now, these reports have been identified as the most important climate reports of the 21st century because the decisions we take now are crucial. And being the information designers responsible for the visualizations of the summaries for policymakers of these reports has been a defining journey for us professionally. The expectation for these reports are usually incredibly high. For the 1.5 report, for instance, there were 2 million hits on the IPCC website, over 4,000 pieces broadcasted in radio and television, over 10,000 articles published just in the first 48 hours following the launch. And if you open the cover of these executive summaries, you will see the names of the drafting authors of each report, the scientists, who are the real heroes. But you will also see our names among them, Tom Johansen and Angela Morelli, which is still unbelievable for us. So my question is, what on earth are 2 information designers doing in the list of drafting authors of the most important climate report of the 21st century? I don't think we have all the answers. We are constantly looking for those ourselves. But what we do know is that information design can shape content. Information design is content. and it has the power to turn information into knowledge, action, and change. And when Anna Pirani, the head of the IPCC Technical Support Unit's Working Group 1, approached us in 2016, it was clear that they wanted to pay more and more attention to the way they were using visualizations in their summaries for policymakers. They wanted to turn the visualizations into milestones to be reviewed and approved in the same way text would be. The challenge for us was very high, considering that the way the IPCC process works is incredibly complex and rigorous. And here's when some extremes enter the picture. Because one IPCC iteration for the drafting process of the report looks like this. Lead author meetings and work is done remotely until authors submit drafts of the report, and the drafts are sent out for review in a very open process. Anybody can comment on the review drafts. Then comments are sent out to the coordinating lead authors and the team. Now, this is one iteration of the IPCC process. And for the 1.5 report, for example, there were 4 of those iterations. And at the very end, you have an approval session where delegations from more than 150 countries, scientists, IPCC chairs, gather together for the final approval. And the review order drafts can be seen as a massive user testing sessions where both the text and the visualizations are reviewed by hundreds of experts worldwide. It is a process that is highly participatory. Now, what do you think that happens when you send out the drafts with the visualizations? You get feedback, right? If you have ever conducted user testing or included users for feedback in your projects, you know what user testing feels like. A mix of empowerment and vulnerability. Now, in the 1.5 report across 3 drafts, 42,001 comments from experts and from countries with different needs and perspectives were collected, and comments have to be addressed one by one, all 42,001. They eat your work like a piece of cake. And they can tear it apart for very good reasons. So this process is so participatory, rigorous and transparent that we have rarely witnessed anything like that before. But this is just me scratching the surface. Maybe you just start grasping the magnitude of the experience for us. And after the drafting process, there is the final approval session. For the 1.5 report, hundreds of delegates from 196 countries gathered in Incheon, South Korea, and the approval is called word-by-word approval, because actually every word, comma, visualization is up for a final approval session. And since we had been going through fire and ice for months, leading up and arriving to the approval, we thought that we were in for just a really interesting trip, almost a conference, to observe some negotiations on the highest level in a beautiful city. And we could not be more wrong, because the word approval doesn't capture what actually happens at these meetings. It makes it sound relaxed and easygoing, but in reality, the work of the scientist is put under a microscope, including the visualizations we co-designed with them. And of course, there are country politics and national interests at play, but the scientists are there to make sure that any changes to the figures, to the visualizations or text do not undermine, misinterpret, or in any way compromise the science. And the adrenaline level is really high. Now, we entered our very first approval without having any idea of how things would be. But we entered all the approvals with a rock-solid knowledge of the content and the data, of the risks and the caveats, of the uncertainties and challenges. And not having that solid knowledge would have been devastating for the visualization process. The visualizations had to be approved word by word, millimeter by millimeter, and the huge benefit of the continuous collaboration kicked in on so many aspects, enabling us to understand the challenges, suggesting the most appropriate solution, being very firm at times, enabling the scientists to own the visualizations, and allowing also the delegates to see these visualizations as a result of their own work, because of the co-creation process in the review rounds. To manage the co-design process, we have to create specific tools to keep everybody in the loop, to ensure everybody is on top of the development from the beginning to the end. One of the things we do is to record the history of each visualization using slide presentations shared with authors and with everybody involved in the process. And we call these presentations slide books. And here I'm flicking through the pages of the slide books of one visualization. For each visual, between the beginning of the process and the final approval, we co-design many versions. The evolution of the visual can be driven by different types of changes in the narrative structure, because the data evolves, because review comments highlight specific challenges, because the narrative of the report can change. So in the presentations, we include the initial sketches sent by the authors, the outcome of the discussions on the peak of the narrative, the drafts, the study of different narrative structures, the unsolved challenges, the strategies to address hundreds of review comments, the email exchange with the authors, the update of the data sets, and how the intent of the visualization evolves until the last iterations, where we focus on the macro and micro design details. Now, we would never claim that the visualizations you see in these summaries for policymakers are, visually speaking, the best they could be. Because given free rein, we would have designed things differently, but it's not about us. The policymakers are the audience, and it's hard to imagine how any data visualization could be more tailored to an audience's needs in this process. Every single one of the world's policymakers gave their stamp of approval to these visuals. By the end of the approvals, the delegates co-owned the visualizations too. Each one of the visualizations represents a lasting tool, not a one-time impression. The basis to start, we hope, a discussion around action. And one of the most important things that I have learned in the past 20 years is that clear, inclusive, and powerful communications are a consequence of good design, but most of all, of brave leadership. Because it is easy to agree that we need more clarity, that we need to communicate data in a more powerful way, but it's often hard to accept that in order to get there, we have to do things in a different way. And working with IPCC has been one of those journeys where you witness a change in culture when it comes to designing data, from a traditional order and delivery way of working to a design-driven way of working, where the involvement of users and many stakeholders is key. And for many organizations, this is the new normal, and it gives us a world of opportunities when it comes to communicating complex data. And I would like to end by sharing a memory. In 2013, I was queuing with my family near the entrance to the Warner Brothers Harry Potter studios in London. And this quote was standing in large letters on one of the walls. No story lives unless someone wants to listen. So it's not just enough to produce data visualizations if they do not meet our audience where they are, whoever the audience is supposed to be. Broad audience for a media outlet, patients for a doctor, policymakers for the IPCC, and so on. So whatever the format, whether it's static or interactive, printed or digital, we have to make sure that we are meeting the audience where they are. Otherwise, we are basically wasting time and resources. And in order to achieve that, we need to co-design with users and content experts. We need to embrace our audience and their needs from the start to make sure that we build engaging and understandable narratives that they want to listen to. So thank you very much for listening. This is from me for today.
Amazing. It's an amazing process and methodology. I have one question, if I can, for you.
Yes.
Just a quick one from here, which is really starting from this last bit that you were saying, the importance of not only addressing the audiences, but involving them from the beginning. So you're talking about here very complex data. You show us data that are also constantly refined and adjusted and updated and integrated and so on. So if instead of the policymakers or the scientists or entrepreneurs, let's talk about maybe, I don't know, students or younger people, how would the process change? Maybe the process wouldn't change, but I'm sure you have to take other things into consideration as well. Or am I wrong?
Yes. No, you are completely right. When we design for different target audience, I would say that the skeleton is pretty much the same, and the logic is pretty much the same: co-designing and participation. So most of the time, we identify the audience, and we don't design with the audience in mind, right? Thinking about persona, so thinking about the average user. We go out, we identify real users, and we interview them. So we start by doing in-depth interviews to identify their needs, to really understand who these people are, where they consume the information. And we carry their knowledge and their presence throughout the entire process. So this happens for IPCC, and it happens for any other project we work with. So if we have to communicate things to patients, if we have to communicate things to school kids, the logic is always the same: embracing and co-designing from the very beginning.
Which I think it's really what makes all of this clearly a very complex and super needed piece of work. So thank you, Angela Morelli, for the work and also for the attention to the needs, the information needs of the different type of audiences or publics, as we journalists call them sometimes, because I think that's what sometimes we not undervalue, but maybe underestimate: the need of really properly taking into consideration the different type of people we're talking to, and we are trying to reach and involve in the public discourse, especially when we're trying to find solutions that cater for all of our needs. Thank you, Angela Morelli, for your work. And
thanks, everybody.
So now we're moving on from the data visualization and the graphic representation of data to another form of expression, which is the theater. And from the climate science and data visualization, we're going to see how theater can actually talk about climate and tell us something about it. And I'm calling Annalisa Brianzi with a big applause. Annalisa will be reading for us, Not Because We're Good by Chris Thorpe, and we will talk about that in a minute. Annalisa.
Thank you. Not Because We're Good by Chris Thorpe. We did this thing not because we're good, not because we're virtuous, or even because we cared. We did it because deep down we know we are selfish, and we know we are lazy, and we know how susceptible we are to lies. Yet, there were evangelists. We even knew some of their names. There were righteous fighters, the people who were all in from the very start. But they were the minority. The rest of us, mostly, just stood there with a vague desire to keep the lights on. It's because it was made easy that we went along, which isn't to say there weren't sacrifices, but we realized making it was easier than the alternative. And yet, it wasn't until the last possible moment that most of us signed on. We only made the changes when we had to. If anything, we did it. In the end, we did it because remembering is hard. And we realized how much of it we'd have to do. We didn't want to remember our bones in the desert. We didn't want to remember panic. We didn't want to remember what happened when the lights went out. We didn't want to remember setting out with just one bag. We didn't want to remember leaving our pets behind. We didn't want to remember walking from our houses for the final time. We did not want to remember guns pointed at the sea. We remembered the boats capsizing. That happened. But in the end, we didn't want to remember when it was us in them. Even then, the desire to somehow keep ourselves together didn't unleash an all-consuming wave of action. It was more a theoretical preference for life over death. There was a time, way back among the decades, when there was still faith in us. If we could only be told in the right way, we'd believe, they said. If there was a magic form of words, in the perfect tone, the right image of a terrible consequence or a shining future, how could it fail to make us more than ordinary? If you want to hear we were good, in the end, then I'll say it, that we chose this, that we all became believers, and this is why it happened. That when the deal was made and the laws were signed, we went out into the streets in joy because we were good and unselfish and we cared. But most of us weren't any of those things. We just wanted to live our lives and only changed because change was made easy. Most of us weren't any of those things. We didn't want to remake the world. We let others change it round us and then lived in it. Of course, some of us have been persuaded, but most of us are quietly drifting. Most of us are on the path of least resistance. The fact is the same, though. The thing was done. Some people got to be heroes. Most of us didn't. And we're so fine with that. We didn't notice. We went along with it. Because in the end, most kinds of living are better than most kinds of dying. If the dying we're talking about is ours.
With this, not because we're good, but and now we're going to welcome, we're going to welcome Chantal Bilodeau. I think she's connected with us from Climate Change Theatre Action. Chantal, oh, you're with us. Okay. Welcome to Milan virtually.
Thank you.
And
it's very nice to be here
today. So we will also have Chris Thorpe in a moment, but maybe he's connecting. Hello, Chris. Welcome.
Hiya. Hello.
Thanks for being with us. And I will start with Chantal, though. Climate Change Theatre Action. We have been looking into how we work with data as scientists, how we work with data in terms of data visualization. And now we're moving into a form of climate communication, which goes through theatre. We heard and we listened to the monologue written by Chris Thorpe. Chantal, how do you work? First of all, what is the Climate Change Theatre Action? Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yes, Climate Change Theatre Action is an initiative that happens every other year. So it's taking place this year in 2021. We commissioned 50 playwrights from around the world to write a short play, like the one you just saw, based on a prompt. And then we take this collection of plays and we make them available to anyone who would like to organize an event in their community within a certain time window that's in the fall to coincide with the United Nations COP meetings. So we create a bit of a movement that makes everyone who participates feels like they're having a bigger impact than if they were just doing something small on their own in their own community.
Right, and who are the main players, I should say, but the main actors of these movements? Who are the people who get involved and want to do something about that?
It tends to be a lot of universities participate, whether they have professors have students read plays in their class or present shows on campus or sometimes even off campus. Theaters, of course, but also environmental organizations, faith groups. Sometimes, like you're doing today, there will be a play that's integrated as part of a conference. Every year we get people who want to participate that we didn't expect, like it gets bigger and bigger.
And how do you work with them? And then I'm coming to you in a second, Chris, but just I'm curious about the methodology that you're using, Chantal. What's the process? How you do actually support these people? Maybe some of them have done some theater already, maybe some haven't. So how do you work with them?
Yeah, it's meant to be as flexible as possible. So you can do it with a lot of resources, or you can do it with no resource. I think it's with 5 minutes, it's easy for anyone to pick up a play and read it. It's not like you have to think about doing something that's an hour long. And the way we support people, we keep in touch, in close communication, and we put all of the events on our website. We publicize them on social media. Then we gather feedback afterwards to see how it went. And people who need a little bit more support were there on email to answer any questions.
Okay, so here we're talking about a different type of ingredient than what we talked before. We talk about the data, about the need of putting the data in graphs. So here we're talking more about the stories or the words that people want to use, right? To either communicate or enact or foster some type of action. And Chris Thorpe, it's very important to reflect also on the words. I mean, we're very careful when we discuss data. The data need to be very precise and very accurate, but words need to be accurate too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not only do we need, accurate data and accurate words, but I think something that I think about a lot is we need accurate form. We need to fit the purpose of the change we want to make around things like climate to the medium that is being used. And I guess this particular piece that I wrote, I was asked to do it at a time when I was in the middle of writing a new text for the Royal Court Theatre in London, which deals specifically with the psychology of reactions to the climate crisis and the role of theatre in being sort of helpful within that. So, yeah, I'm thinking a lot about, when I write things like this, about being very specific with my language about specific aspects of that reaction. Yeah.
That's one issue that we discuss a lot on the media, at least certainly in this country, which is the type of language that media sometimes use to discuss about climate, and the fact of trying very often to be on a sensationalist sort of side, or use alarm or emergency type of tones, right? And we know now that that kind of language is probably not that effective in allowing people to feel that they can do something. Did you see this changing in years, or did you see any change in terms of the awareness about the importance also of this type of language? Chris, sorry, and then I'm going back to Chantal.
I think there's been I can only really speak for sort of theatre and, a little bit for film rather than the media in general. I think there is a zeroing in at the moment, a really healthy one in theatre, on the kinds of experience it can provide that will be useful. I think we've been through a stage of alarmism, desperately trying to tell everyone there is a problem through theatre. I think we've been through a stage that we're still in a way, where theatre thinks that telling stories, because that's what it thinks of itself as good at, telling the classic kind of play set 50 years in the future, where a family get together in a house that is being slowly lost to the sea, the kind of allegorical kind of play, or the play that is, set in a moment of crisis and explores the response to that disaster through a group of characters. We're going through the storytelling phase, and I think we're coming to a healthier phase, particularly when we're starting to think about things like the potential of social and civilizational collapse, where theatre is seeing itself as a place where people can come, they can take some time, and they can, almost as a thought experiment, examine the possible range of psychological reactions to the changes that we're currently going through, in a way that allows the audience to leave with maybe slightly more options in terms of their own personal way of navigating through this usefully. So, for example, one of the things that I'm interested in theatre saying is, let's take as a fact, for the time that we're here in this room, that civilization as we know it is going to fundamentally change, and that the infrastructure around us is going to disappear. How do we then prepare ourselves psychologically to be useful in that scenario, rather than paralyzed or despairing? So that's the shift that I see, particularly in theatre.
Do you see a similar shift, Chantal? You have, in the experience you've been going through, the type of people who've been evolving in this particular movement? Did you see a change of attitude, a need of focusing on a more proactive, maybe, or a more reflexive sort of way than the emergence that we were facing years ago as the main topic?
I'm actually a little envious of Chris and the UK, because in North America, we're still years behind in terms of what's happening in the theater in relation to climate change. I think there is more, certainly, especially in the last 2 years, but we're still catching up. Here, there is still a lot of dystopian and focus sort of on the crisis, and there is a lot of, I think, education and learning that has to happen for artists to start to look towards the future and what has to happen and how we want to be in that future. But building on what Chris said, I think one of the things that theater is so good at is when you sit in the audience, you get to practice a kind of life that you don't have, right? For an hour or two, your brain is processing a story the same way it would process an experience that you were having yourself. So you get to practice having certain values. You have to practice having certain emotions. And then you can go out into the world and see if that practice was useful and if you want to apply it to your real life.
Right. What kind of people are involved in the type of experiences you are leading, Chantal? What kind of, as you said, like they're very different, but I'm also wondering in terms of maybe age or type of community they come from. Is very varied the type of interest, or?
It's pretty wide, because we have middle schools, kids who are 13, 14, 15 who participate. And we've had people who are Quakers, part of a faith community, and who have groups who meet regularly, who tend to be older. The one common thread, though, is that, of course, these are people who are already interested and concerned about climate. And so the goal for us, I feel, is not to, sometimes people ask me like, oh, but how do you reach people who don't care, who don't believe in climate change or anything like that? And I say, well, if they don't, they're not going to go see a play anyway. So we're not trying to reach them. What we're trying to do is to reach people who are already concerned and who may find comfort in. One of the comments I get a lot is like, oh, I didn't know there was so many people in my community who had the same values, the same concerns. So there's a sense of getting people together that's really important. And also we're trying to encourage people wherever they are in their journey to take one more step and become that much more engaged.
Right. So my last question is for Chris, which is, in many countries, Italy is one of them, theaters have been strongly impacted by the pandemic, right? And there wasn't even any more this space. I mean, it's only reopening now, the space where we can actually go back to the theater and maybe even being involved in the labs in theater and so on. Do you think that this experience maybe is even opening up a little bit more of space or need for that type of reflection you were talking about? Are we becoming more aware maybe that the crises are connected or not? What's your take on that? Let's see. Is there an opportunity or not?
It's a really interesting, is there any value in terms of climate, preparing ourselves for the coming decades in what we have been through in the past year and a half? I would say yes, as long as it doesn't cause us to overestimate our own resilience and the journey that we need to go on. It has to be said that the last 18 months globally has been incredibly, incredibly difficult, for different places at different times in that 18 months. Italy being one of the places most badly affected early on, in that. But I think we can take models of that, of like specific local interactions and projects that have maybe fostered a sense of community resilience. But I don't think we can see the pandemic as a whole as a rehearsal for climate change and the potential effects of, the serious changes that we're already in, because I think frankly the pandemic's a lot smaller. So we can't fool ourselves that it is a rehearsal for something bigger, because what is coming is potentially so much bigger that actually this has only tested us to a far smaller extent.
Right. Do you have a comment on that, Chantal, as well? I don't know, from your American perspective, do you see these experiences having taught us something, also in the view that Chris was mentioning now, maybe not to become too optimistic about our way and ability to actually fight something?
Yes, definitely. However, on the practical end of things, I think we have learned things like we don't need to travel all the time to talk to each other, which is, I think it would have taken us much longer to learn that hadn't been for this crisis. But I agree with Chris that everybody was unprepared, and we've had years to prepare for what's happening with climate change, and we can't, I'm hoping that we're not going to go through something like what we went through in the last 2 years, where all the unpreparedness and the failures of institutions was so apparent.
I think just to finish that as well, I agree with you, Chantal, that we have learned specific things. And one of the specific things that we've learned is the value of swift and clear government intervention, in response to a specific moment of crisis. We've learned that governments can move faster than they have been telling us they're able to. And I think that's a really clear lesson to carry forward into things like the COP26 and and all the meetings that are about to happen.
Okay, so let's hope that more reflection will take place and more ability on our side also to face such a bigger challenge. I totally agree with Chris. So Chris Thorpe and Chantal Bilodeau, thank you so much for being with us today, Climate Change Theatre Action and Chris Thorpe.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're now moving on to another form of expression, which is music. And I'm going to introduce you the Climate Music Project. The Climate Music Project, we are connecting, I think, with Stefan Crawford and Eric Walker from California. It's a very complex project. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's probably very early morning for you, but
Buenos Aires there.
Thank you for being with us. It's a complex project that I'm going to Stefan and Eric to explain to us, where music is really the main form of communication. And so the floor is all yours.
I understand that they were going to play a quick clip from a video first. Is that the case?
I think so.
Okay.
Let me just ask to the...
Or I could just start jamming.
There we go. All right. That was indeed a very brief clip. Well, thank you. It is a pleasure to join you today. We just heard a very brief excerpt from Climate by composer Eric Ian Walker, who's with us here today. The entire piece is about 30 minutes in length and explores the physical science of climate change over 450 years. We're going to hear another clip at the end of this segment, a little farther into the piece. In the meantime, I will briefly introduce the Climate Music Project and then hand it over to Eric, who will tell you more about this powerful piece of music and what it was like as an artist to collaborate with scientists on the project. So the Climate Music Project, put simply, connects people to climate science and action through music. Our goal is to use the emotional power of music to convey insights about the climate crisis that are both viscerally and personally felt. We think music can take us on a journey of the imagination to experience possible futures and then to return us to the present so that we can share what we experienced and choose the future that we actually want. It's the closest thing that we have to what you might call a time machine, and we desperately need the equivalent of a time machine to feel and therefore to understand the urgency of the crisis that's building. Our performances are also opportunities for people to convene conversations around solutions and to connect the practical pathways to action. Since our founding in 2015, climate music has reached thousands of people around the world. Our music is science-guided, meaning that while it is art, and it is, in fact, science guided by specific scientific facts and underlying data sets. Our objective is to create music that resonates emotionally with audiences. If our music were purely data-driven in a very strict sense, that objective would be difficult to achieve because let's face it, data curves don't typically sound very alluring when you display them sonically. So we allow our composers like Eric a lot of creative freedom, but in close collaboration with a small team of scientists who present briefings on the science and the underlying data sets. The task then is to work together to find creative ways to reflect the science within the music. Eric was our very first composer and experienced this firsthand, and he'll share that in a minute. Our vision is to work with highly creative artists to create music across multiple genres, from classical to hip hop, and that will reach and resonate with audiences in their own communities wherever they are. So rather than creating music in San Francisco and taking it on the road, the vision is to work with artists where they are for their communities. Currently, we are performing 3 portfolio compositions. So Climate, which you're hearing very brief excerpts from today, and it would be great if at some point you could hear the entire composition, which is, as I say, very powerful. Our second composition, Icarus in Flight, is a piece of chamber music that explores human drivers of the climate crisis over 200 years. And finally, What If We is a jazz and spoken word piece that focuses on climate change and sea level rise. Currently, we have several new compositions under development, including a full violin concerto expected to premiere in 2023.
Wow.
All of our compositions explore and contrast possible futures, referencing the IPCC's future scenarios. Our compositions also feature, as you saw, a visual element that provides cues to help the audience to capture the meaning in the music. So, in brief, climate music is art with a message about the urgency of action on the climate crisis and about the choices that we can make today. Our live performances include multiple opportunities to reinforce these messages and to engage our audiences. So, for example, typically one of our science advisors provides an introduction to set the context before the concert, and then also participates with one or more of our action partners in audience engagement after the performance. Starting later this year, we're also going to make available to our audiences supplemental resources on both the science and the practical pathways to action. So here's a concrete example of what we aim for from one of our first concerts. After one of the concerts, this is what it was at the Planetarium in Oakland, California, a woman stood up and told us what she had experienced. She said that as she listened to the music and watched the years tick by, she compared the feel of the music at the year she was born to how it felt when her daughter was born and how it felt when her granddaughter might be born. So in this way, over the course of just 30 minutes, an issue that had seemed abstract to her was in fact dropped into the arc of her family's own history. So this personalization of the issue, coupled with providing access to action pathways, is the core goal of the project. If you're interested in hearing a live climate music concert, the next opportunity will be on November 12th, which coincides with the final day of the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow. We'll be merging live performances in San Francisco and Vienna, Austria, into one unified concert for climate action for a global audience online, including at universities in North America and in Europe. You can find more information and also sign up for our mailing list at climatemusic.org. Finally, I'll just say that history has shown us that music can unite us. It can give us courage in times of crisis. It speaks truth to power. It can inspire us and it can challenge us. Music can reach us at our core and open our hearts so that our minds can finally see clearly. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who will tell you more about climate and what the piece is about and how it was created.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, like Stefan said, one of the things that I think was really powerful about the piece was creating a timeline, which you saw in the video, where people were seeing the years march by and they're watching the graph go up as they're listening to the music. We didn't overdo it with the visuals. I know you saw some pictures, but we didn't play on people's emotions too much with the images, so that they were mostly experiencing the music and seeing the numbers go by. And it's an interesting thing as a composer to have, they didn't have a time clock, but they had the year clock, right? Mm-hmm. And every 25 years was 1 minute over our span of time, our half an hour. And we, the data that we used was basically from 1850. 1850 projected out to 23, excuse me, I should have got a glass of water, out to 2300. Stefan, can you get me a glass of water?
There you go.
Sorry. I may go get a glass of water in a second. So this was one of the challenges, of course, was having this long arc of time, right? Where we were going from, we even spent about, because our first show was at the planetarium, we decided to use coming from deep space because we could do it. And that was a really cool thing to get way, way out in the universe and then slowly come into the planet. And then we ended up using that in the video. So if you ever watch the whole video, we do the same thing now. So we added some time on the front end, and I liked doing that because I wanted to also have a sort of land on Earth and kind of have a calm zone where nothing was changing for a while. And there was some fretting about it being boring to the audience. But we just kind of hung out and had something sound kind of pretty. And then it slowly starts to change. So in working with the scientists Andy and Bill, we were meeting at least once a week, a lot of the time, or every other week. And I have a group, the ensemble was 5 people. And we were developing the piece, and we were going back and forth about, does this sound right? But also using the data. The process was, I think, really instructive to me because as a composer, you like to have control over what you're doing, and you get to decide when things happen. And with the climate data, you don't. And you may have made up some little riff that you like. And if I start getting echo, please let me know. If you start getting weird noises, I'll go to headphones. I might have some little some riff I like, something that I think sounds good. And maybe you get about 45 seconds before that's going to turn into you don't have a lot of time. So we had to go through about 3 different thematic sketches before we found a theme and a musical idea that didn't get completely wrecked within too short a time, and we couldn't have it go all the way out to 2300 without it turning into unintelligible noise. So it took a while, and we worked on it for like about 18 months. And I did like the process with working with everybody. I had to make a lot of decisions. We found out a lot of things about, I'm sorry, I'm blanking from what we found out a lot of things about how when you have a certain amount, let's say the temperature is rising 1 degree going from 2 degrees to 3 degrees. And it says, well, we'll just turn the knob this much more because we've got it all figured out. And we would do that and, or, go faster. And we would realize that it didn't have sonically, it didn't sound like it had increased 25%, let's say. So we had to judge also by what we were hearing with what we were doing with our numbers. And that was an interesting thing to learn, was that they really weren't necessarily correlated. And so you had to trust your ears a little bit. So I'll give you a little example of, if I'm not running out of too much time, I don't know how long I'm going to go for. But here's the keyboard I'm using today. And like I was just playing for a moment ago, like if I'm at the point of like 1 degree or even 0 degrees, I might be playing this piece like I was playing before. And this is the part where we've already warmed up, so now I'm playing in 7. I'm not playing in 4/4, so the time is getting slightly chopped up. If I go another while later, I'm going to start just introducing 1 bad note to every chord. That seems really primitive, but that's exactly what we did at one point. Now, what we did do is the temperature went up. We just kept going faster and faster and faster, and more dissonance comes in. We also used the ocean pH, and I'll come back to my camera so you can see my smiling face. So we went back to ocean pH as it was dropping. That controlled the musical form. This turned out to be one of the things that I, at some point as a composer, I maybe wouldn't have done, but I'm glad I did it because it really tore apart the piece in a way that the scientists completely approved of. So that worked out well. So, for example, I'm going to go back to the other thing, and I'm going to play one more little snip here. So then if I'm going a little faster and the changes start to happen quicker, I'm going to still play the same little tune. We'll stop there. Whoop, which camera am I on?
You're on the keyboard still.
There we go.
Hey, Eric, could you just, if you have, we have, I think, a couple more minutes here. Could you just talk a little bit about how much you knew about the issue before you started, and how your understanding of the urgency of the issue evolved over the course of those 18 months working with the scientists, and how did you feel about that?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that really stood out to me was over the course we were working at is how the perspective of the scientists changed because of the changing data on what was happening to the planet. I knew a lot about it when we first started, but it was very eye-opening to work on the piece. And to make it, I mean, it made it difficult for a while. Just even look at the sky. I know I sound like Chicken Little, right? But there were times when I really wanted it to stop. I didn't want to work on the piece anymore. One of the things that helped was to boil it down to just the data and what we were doing, and putting it into a frame of the time of the piece and making cues that were about time, not about the date. So my perspective did change on it, and particularly the scientists, they went from being more hopeful to being more about it being, we're needing a silver bullet to solve our problem. I think the one thing that I learned that was really new to me was how long it takes for CO2 to dissipate. So if we get up to 3 degrees hotter, it's probably going to keep going up to 4 just because of what's in the atmosphere already. And then it will take hundreds of years for it to go back down. And I think that was the thing. That was the hardest lesson.
I know you have a favorite part of the piece. Can you describe what it is?
I like the part where we get up to about 5 degrees hotter, where there was a orchestral theme early on, way back in the 19th century, that Michel played on violin. That's very pretty and kind of feels like humankind is reaching for something back in the early industrial age. And it's kind of positive because people were actually very positive about the industrial age back then for the most part. And then at 5 degrees hotter, which is a huge tipping point for us, that would be really bad. And the music has gotten completely deconstructed. And I cheated at this point, you could say, and I brought that theme back in a very torn up way. And it's one of the most satisfying moments, yes, Stefan. For me as a composer, the most successful bits where that theme comes back, and man, is that, if I can brag for 2 seconds, that is so effective to me, because it feels like the whole planet is tilting in parts of it, right? That's the way it feels.
No, absolutely, yeah.
I'm talking about live, folks, for you that are watching. When we perform it live, that's the moment where it just feels like the whole thing's just going, it's like a giant careening thing. Is that telling us to stop? Is that our ding?
No, that's actually
Is that your phone?
That is my phone. Someone else is telling me something. Yeah, I have to say that for everybody, that Eric was for us really a dream composer, and I don't want to make you blush, Eric, but when we started, we just sort of took a chance and decided that we were going to just do a day's test without having anyone having met anybody. So we just invited, I did some research on some composers, and Eric had done a lot of collaborations, had done a lot of theater work, some film work, a lot of different genres of music. And we just took a chance and invited Eric to the studio. Eric brought a few musicians. I researched the scientist. 2 came. Nobody had met each other except Eric knew the musicians, but that was it. And we basically said, you know, it's 9 a.m. now. There's food here. The bathrooms are down the hall. The doors are otherwise locked. At 5 p.m., a test audience is going to come in and you're going to perform something you create in the next 8 hours. And it could have gone horribly wrong. But luckily, everybody just sort of just came around as a real team. And within a very short amount of time, everyone was working like mad. And at 5 p.m., about 30 people came in and we did a test performance. And 20 minutes later, there were tears in the audience. And so that was really the test case, and that directly led to the birth of the Climate Music Project. So Eric was there from the very first day.
Yeah. If I could do one last thing, I just want to show the audience a picture, if you can see this, of this primitive version of the score, which maybe you can't really see that well. But this was like this very basic color-coded thing where this was the timeline of one section. We're out in outer space. We land on Earth. Then we're on Earth. Then the 1800s start. The Industrial Revolution starts. Then we go to the thing called the winds of change, is when things really start to change, when it's in purple. Then the ride is from 3 degrees. Here we're at 3 degrees hotter now. This is at 22 minutes. And it goes out over to here. We had a blue planet thing where we went back to 2 degrees to remind people how nice things could be. And then we went to a thing that says rising, slow, creepy, scary. And this was going from 5 degrees all the way up to 9 degrees Celsius, centigrade hotter. And the funny thing, the reason I like to show this, besides the fact that I like to do color-coded charts, is the musicians ended up always looking at this. Even though some people had music to read, but basically everybody got their parts nailed. And they loved looking at this as their guide. And I didn't use this, but at some point, you know, during rehearsals, I went around to everybody and said, why are you guys still using this? And they were like, well, it's very effective. And so anyway, you get a little bit of an idea of the layout of the piece. And I'm not going to talk too long about that, but yeah. I wanted to show that.
Yeah, I think we've got just about another minute, but maybe we should also just mention before we close that the piece, like all of our pieces, tracks 2 future scenarios. So when Eric was talking about, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 degrees Celsius warmer, that's where it's tracking a future scenario called RCP 8.5, Representative Concentration Pathway 8.5. It's an IPCC scenario. At one point, though, and Eric, you might want to quickly describe this, we dropped down to RCP 2.6, which is a much more optimistic scenario. And it's a very eerie part. It's on the one hand, it's hauntingly beautiful. It's like a respite. Eric, you want to maybe quickly just describe it before we go to the next clip?
Sure. I mean, that's right after the point where we were talking about earlier, where it's getting huge and the theme comes back and kind of is failing and everything's falling apart. And then it has an abrupt stop and it goes down to this kind of, you know, the harmony sounds and everything that go back to the 2 degrees, but it's not completely a happy place. You know, it's there and it's a more livable place. You can tell by the contrast, but it's not by any means you know, all
what it was.
Yeah, it's not particularly cheerful, but it's livable is the way I would call it.
Yeah. All right. Well, Eric, I think our time is just about up. We have just 2 minutes for the last clip. So if you guys could.
Can I say one last thing?
Sure.
I just wanted to say at the shows, it was very interesting to see audience reaction like Stefan referred to. It was a galvanizing effect on children and adults. And it did get conversation going. We live in a country where people don't like to be told what to do. And it's, even though we're preaching to the choir, so many people did not realize the urgency. And so it changed perspective in a lot of ways. Okay.
Yeah, and I have to say also that we thought that it wouldn't be appropriate for very young kids, but at one point at the planetarium, a group of fourth graders came in, and they were great, and they asked lots of questions. In fact, one of them asked if she could have the data sets and the graphs for her unit on climate change at school. So that was really great. So, yeah. All right, we can go to the next clip, I think.
Music for children.
So thank you, Eric Walker and Stefan Crawford, for showing and sharing with us also the challenge of the process and the challenge of using the scientific data and to produce something so immersive, so that's such an immersive experience as music is. The Climate Music Project, thank you so much for having spent so much time with us, and also particularly because I know that it's early, it's morning there. So thank you, Eric, and thank you, Stefan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie.
And now we're going to take a 10 minutes break. So as you know, because of the rules, unfortunately, we cannot have anything around here. We cannot bring you coffee or any drinks, but you can take 10 minutes, walk around. There is the bar outside and everything, and come back, because then we're going to start with the award and dimensions part. 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being here after 2 hours of event. And here we are with the CMCC Climate Change Communication Award, Maria Rebecca Balestra. We know that I am Mauro Bonocore. I am head of communication of the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. And CMCC, as you know, is a research center on climate change. And climate sciences provide us with even more detailed and robust information about climate change, its causes, its impacts. The vast amount of data that the scientific community makes available provide, among the others, a clear message. This message is that climate change is pervasive. It affects all aspects of our life. And it means that it is something that we all should be aware of. And to get this point, science is essential. We would know nothing about climate change without science. But when talking to people, Science is not always enough. Science needs to be in dialogue with many, many other ways of the human expression, from journalism to arts, to music, to theater, to performing arts, visual art, data visualization, and so on. This is the aim of our award. We will know more in depth in a few minutes. We are going to give a prize to award the winner with 5,000 euros, but it is just a part of our initiative, because the biggest part is our attempt, our aim to create connections, among many of the projects around the world that share with us this feeling, this aim of contributing with several kind of communications to increasing the awareness of climate change. So I would ask my colleague Alessandra Mazzai to tell us more about the Climate Change Communication Award Rebecca Balestra. Microfono per piacere? L'altro microfono?
Thank you. Thank you, Mauro. It's a pleasure to be here to present this initiative today. The Climate Change Communication Award Rebecca Balestra, as Mauro said, is much more than a contest, much more than an award. It's a platform that is being created, a platform that connects people and initiatives around this big challenge of communicating climate change. Rebecca Balestra had a vision. She said that she wanted to create a platform able to connect knowledge and to share experiences to really change the future. And this is what we are trying to do today together here and with this initiative. The platform is created. It's on this website, www.cmccaward.eu. This is a collection of all the admitted projects that applied and were admitted to the contest this year, to this first edition of the award. If you have a look at the website, you will find fact sheets of all the projects, and you will have an insight of this inspiring landscape that is being drawn by all these different ideas and practices. We received over 150 proposals, and over 100 have been admitted and are all on the website. They came from different contexts, from over 30 countries and all continents. Most of the proposals came from Europe, but we also had proposals from North America, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Proposals came from individuals, from organizations, from NGOs, from a very different landscape also of proposals. We had projects focused on photography. We had projects of art, and which include installations, sculptures, paintings, exhibitions, artistic videos, many different forms of art. We had books, from educational books for children to photographic books, also publication in a satirical tone. Many projects use gaming to engage different publics, the children, the youngest, but also adults. And we have projects of data visualization and projects that use digital tools for science dissemination. Journalism, there are many web portals, web docs, but also projects that try to fill the gap between science and journalism in different ways. We have projects of training and education that address the youngest. We have videos, from videos on social media made by climate activists to documentaries to YouTube channels completely dedicated to climate change in different tones, from the most serious to the more satirical. And finally, storytelling through theatre and through music, as we have seen today. The winner, which will be announced soon, has been selected by an international jury made of outstanding experts which draw a landscape of different aspects of climate change communication. We have a meteorologist who is Mike Favetta, founder of Climate Without Borders. We have Giuseppe La Spada, water artist and sustainability communication expert, and we have both of them today here at the event. We have in the jury Michael Mann, the famous professor of the Penn State University. We have Caterina Seia, director and founder of the Cultural Welfare Center, and Mira Selva, journalist and deputy director of the Reuters Institute. The jury evaluated the projects according to a series of criteria which have been defined at the beginning of the launch of the call of the proposal, including the innovation, the potential to have an impact on reality, their ability to reach different audiences that go beyond the scientific community, and their ability to convey scientific messages in an understandable way, but sticking to a rigorous tone and information. Finally, we would like to thank all the network of institutions that supported our initiative. The initiative has been created by the CMCC Foundation with the patronage of All for Climate Italy 2020, the Italian Ministry for Ecological Transition, University Ca' Foscari of Venice, Consigliere Onoraire della Consigliere Onoraire di Monaco a Venise, Rai per il Sociale, and supported by Carbon Sync, with media partners TGR and Rai Radio 3. And this event is organized in the context of the Sustainable Development Festival 2021, organized by the ASVIS, the Italian Association of Sustainable Development, in collaboration with Base, which is hosting us today here. Thank you for being here, and let's see the next.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you. So we have seen many kind of way to communicate climate science, from visuals to words to theater to books and many other ways. But all of them have got something in common, one thing in common. All of them start from science. And this collaboration between science and art was in the mission and in the vision of Rebecca Balestra, the artist whose name is associated to the award. Now, a short video to introduce the figure of Maria Rebecca Balestra by Elena Mencarelli e Giuseppe La Spada.
Hello everyone, my name is Elena Mencarelli and I'm the author of the book Maria Rebecca Balestra, Phenomenology of Posthumanism. And I'm really glad to be here today and to have the chance to introduce Rebecca in occasion of the Climate Change Communication Award. In the book, I resume the topics that Rebecca talks about in 3 macro categorizations: technology, nature, and traveling itself. These 3 topics are all examined in relation to the figure of the human being on individual level and also on a global scale as the humankind. The post-human condition is what we are all living in today. It's the cultural, political, anthropological, environmental, economical, present context. And at the same time, it defines the end of the humanistic era. The post-human universe is animated by fluid, open, interconnected energies that are constantly in the making. She goes beyond conceptual boundaries because she confronts herself with different topics like science, religion, history, mythology, and so on. And also she collaborates with different cultural figures, not just with artists, but also with, as I said, other platforms. Also, she goes beyond physical boundaries through traveling, which has such an important role in her art practice. And also she goes beyond the boundaries of the white box of the museum. And she starts exhibiting in places that can present her artworks to a broader audience. And I'm thinking about pieces such as Prisoner, 5 Minutes Free Zone, I'm Not Alone, Journey into Fragility, or There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom. So we can see how Rebecca changes her behavior with nature along the years. And at the beginning of 2000, for example, she produces artwork that aim towards a symbiotic encounter with the landscape. Then from the exhibition, The Future is Near, The Future is Now, she starts to produce artworks that are dystopic and that denounce the environmental tragedies, the environmental crisis created by globalization and neoliberalism. And then from the second decade of the 2000s, she inaugurates Restoration Path, producing artworks that wants to offer solutions to the environmental damaging. And she does that opening herself to different collaborations, of course, through travels in different countries, because we said how traveling is important to her, but really using different cultural personalities to nourish her research and to create possibilities for a better change. And Journey into Fragility, it develops following the 12 theses of Massimo Morasso. So we see how Rebecca starts traveling around the world and she visits 12 art residencies. For example, in Ghana, in Brazil, in Costa Rica, in Asia, and in each of these residencies, she examines the local reality on a geopolitical level, on a cultural level, but also regarding the local landscape, the local nature that she wants to discover and preserve and communicate its richness to the broader audience. So she started producing artworks that really link the local reality with the globality. So Rebecca was much more than a conceptual artist. She would define herself as a cultural operator, as a thinker. Artists are people able to guide the community in making the right choices that are respectful for the environment and for cultural and ecological diversity. And through her artwork, she would manifest the power of the creativity skills proper of the mankind. She would manifest how diversity is a richness, it's not an obstacle. And also she would show how a relationship that is a dialogue relationship between nature and man is much better than the anthropocentric supremacy. And this is what could save the planet in its destiny. And she would actively engage with educational institutions, with scientists, with politicians to offer solutions. In fact, she founded the the Festival for the Earth, which is an international platform gathering the voices of multiple cultural personalities, amongst which Nobel and Pulitzer Prizes winners, and even including educational activities to foster the importance of protecting nature for the future and for our presence as well. I want to read an extract of Rebecca's interview that you can find in its entirety in the book, where she clarifies her own role as an artist, but also she clarifies what her goals are. It is very interesting to be an artist in our time. As humans, we activated events and processes that didn't exist in the past, such as the alteration of the ecosystem, global warming, genetic manipulation. The artist is a values producer because he's able to guide people. This one is the only historical time where art has a paramount social role. Society doesn't know where it's going because unknown dynamics have been triggered. Here, the artist can act as a compass, offering creative visions to reshape our way of being a civilization.
So it's super inspiring to learn more about the life and also the thinking and the type of approach of Maria Rebecca Balestra. I would like to call Giuseppe La Spada. Giuseppe La Spada, artist, juror. Let me give you... one of the jurors of this award. And I would like to ask you, you know, and you've been working, collaborating with Rebecca Balestra, and also you have been now in the jury, and so focusing on the importance of finding one. We will announce very soon the winner. How important it is from your point of view, the fact of working into this effort or supporting this effort or selecting one project and supporting the communication of climate change? What's your thought and your take on that?
Thank you. It was a way to be connected with her again. So I tried to don't use only my mind, but thinking about her during our operation, selecting the amazing projects that we received. And so it was an amazing experience. I wrote something. First of all, I want to say thank you to Elena for this precious video. Elena is a very special person and tell in a very well way something more about Rebecca. It was a great pleasure for me. Has been to meet a person like Rebecca in my life. She was a great artist, a sensitive and prophetic person that we are a huge energy and knows how to involve everyone in this very important mission, which aims to create new collective awareness. I've learned many things, and a lot of opportunities have been given to me through this collaboration. Very often, we don't understand how meeting a person can change ourselves forever and make us going on in new directions. Rebecca left this planet too early, but we are lucky to have a moment like this one to make her search and her will to create virtuous connection to evolve, not in vain. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rebecca.
And thank you, Giuseppe La Spada. We've seen among the supporters of the award, there is Carbon Sync. So I'm calling Andrea Mangiani, director of Carbon Sync. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Elisabetta.
And of course, it's very important to know something more about the Carbon Sync project and how it's connected to this award, why it's important for you to support it.
Okay, first of all, I would like to say thank you to CMCC, and thanks, Mauro, for the presentation. So Carbon Sync we are really proud to support this initiative on Climate Change Communication Award on Rebecca Balestra. First of all, because as a company, we focus all our effort to support companies in how fight climate change, how to mitigate their impact. So every day for us is quite a challenge to understand the way to simplify the message to our client and how to support them in their transition to this decarbonization pathway and strategy. What I want to say is that I am very proud to be here today because, of course, I am somehow linked with these events. And one of the things I want to say first is that, of course, for us is fundamental to support event like this, because I really understand that the importance of connection. For example, we talk about connection. Why is important connection? Because if today I am here is because, of course, I am part of this network of company that are working on the topic of climate change in Italy, and by also I am part of I'm kind of connected with this award. In 2016, I was awarded by Carraro as a company for the Carbon Finance Award, and we win this award. And then I think also thanks to this, also the company has grown in the last 5 to 6 years a lot. But also I think, and this is why I am really happy to support an event on communication, that communication is so important because it's really a leverage for fighting climate change. And we're challenging every day in Carbon Sync on how to communicate in the easy way and how to support our clients in their journey into fight climate change. So thank you very much. And I'm really happy to be here and support this initiative. Thank you.
Is this on? Yeah. Thank you, Andrea Maggiani. You will see him in a minute again, but it's now time to announce, first of all, the mentions, the special mentions. I'm particularly moved to do this because the special mentions are for two people that have been an important part also of my life, not only of the wider scene of science communication. So I'm here also representing Rai Radio 3 and Radio 3 Scienza, which is a daily program that was ideated by Rossella Panarese and curated by her for over 18 years. And so I'm very, very pleased to announce the special mention in the name of Rossella Panarese to Giulia Alice Fornaro from Frida and Alex Nicolini for the podcast Da Clima a Fondo. Welcome. It is, of course, as I say, and you can see, I'm a bit emotional when I speak about Rossella Panarese, but also about the fact of finding now a product which is, again, a podcast that is actually facing and trying to win the challenge of communicating the climate crisis and the climate challenge. Giulia Alice Fornaro.
First of all, I'm moved to because Rossella Panarese was one of my mentors also in making journalism and radio. So something about the podcast you asked. So the Da Clima a Fondo is a 5-episode podcast trying to explain the complexity of climate change reality in a multidisciplinary way. We had the ambition of try to tell not everything, but many things on this argument from different point of view, and mixing different voices and different languages. And with the different voices, I intend, of course, starting from the scientists, from the experts of the themes treated, not only the climate argument as atmosphere or physical fact, but also society, justice, psychologists, experts. And we mix these expert voices with the ones of people, common people, volunteer, engaging and getting involved as volunteers, like, for example, the Climate Route Boys and Girls, which here we have Alex Nicolini representing them, and who were happy to get involved with our project. So the other voice is
the other voice is Alex Nicolini. Can you tell us something about Climate Route?
Yeah. First of all, thank you. I'm very honored to be here representing the Climate Route volunteers and all the association. And I wanted to thank in particularly all the volunteers that worked with us in the production of this podcast, and in particular Filippo Micheli and Maria Graziaieva that are not here today. And well, when we first met Frida's to talk about podcast, we think about how we can bring something new in this podcast. And in particular, we are a young association that has the purpose to mount an expedition from Marmolada Glacier to the Bering Strait. And during this expedition, we wanted to tell what we see through social media, and after that with a documentary. And so the question for us was how to be the bridge between the super important work that the scientific community does and the languages of common people. And for us, the answer and the proper way to tell this was to talk about some stories from the world. And yeah, of course, these stories from the world help us to bring with the listener with us, to increase their curiosity, their awareness on about climate change appears in the whole world, and that all things are interconnected.
So podcasts are a way today that are like, we say podcast is becoming huge because it is a medium that is actually very powerful in telling stories. But we have to say that we selected, the mention was selected jointly by the CMCC and Rai Radio 3, Radio 3 Scienze in particular. We selected also for the technical quality. It's not easy to produce a podcast. So Giulia Alice Fornaro, can you tell us also a little bit the process of learning also how to really put together these voices, but also with a very high level of technical quality?
Okay, yes, we, as a University of Torino, we have a huge network. We have the fortune of knowing different people and different expertise all put together, working together. And the University of Torino, we have also the press office offering, and the communication office offering us the radio instruments, which are really highly qualified, but also a network around the radio. So we could really pick up different expertise. I want to, I mean, for the post-processing of the podcast, I want to thank very much Dunia La Vecchia, which is my colleague in the editorial staff of Frida, our forum of research, and also for putting together, for writing the test and all the contents, Mariella Flores, which is my other colleague, which really got involved in everything. So it was time and work. Basically, it doesn't come by the sky, but this is there's no secret, just work.
A lot of teamwork. So
exactly.
So thank you. Stay here because we have a special plaque. And so the motivation for this mention is Can I tell you again, the podcast is the Clima Fondo in collaboration with the Climate Route. And the project was selected for its multidisciplinary approach, the attention paid to offering diversity of voices and perspectives, and its ability to transfer information and its technical quality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. And we have a second mention, again selected jointly by the CMCC and Radio Trescenza. I'm of course representing the entire team of Radio Trescenza, my colleagues Paolo Conte, Francesca Buoninconti, Marco Motta, Roberta Fulci and Cristiana Castellotti. And so we work together to select this special mention dedicated to Pietro Greco. Pietro Greco was a science journalist, one of the hosts of Radio Trescenza. He was also managing editor of Dibbo Live, which is a task that I am now doing, that I inherited from Pietro. And the special mention, Pietro Greco, goes to Nicolas Lozito for his newsletter, Il Colore Verde. And I think we are connecting with Nicolas Lozito. The project was selected for its attention to content and style, its ability to combine a light and appealing tone with the provision of rigorous and timely information, and its cross-cutting approach to climate change. Welcome, Nicolas Lozito.
Hello everyone. Hope you can hear me well.
And we need to tell that Nicolas just spent the last 2 hours training journalists about how to speak about climate change. So it's really also a pleasure to have you here and see that you're really putting a lot of effort in this. He's a journalist at Il Messaggero, but he's also curating this newsletter. Nicolas Lozito, can you tell us something about the newsletter, how you started this project and how you're keeping going?
Okay, first thing I want to say is thank you for the mention, for the prize. I'm honored to be here with you, with this connection, with the internet. But we are with you. I'm there with you, and I'm honored to receive this prize named after Pietro Greco. I hope to honor his name with my work. This is the first thing I want to say. My newsletter, it's called Il Colore Verde, the color green. First thing, because the green for the human eyes is the color with more shades. And I think that the same thing applies to ecologism, to environment sciences. And we have to see all these shades. And I want to represent them with my newsletter. Every Saturday, I write and send this newsletter, writing about new people that create something, maybe new technology, a new startup, a new network of activism, for example. Every Saturday, I write about new discoveries or new studies, and I try to create this new cultural approach to environment. That's it. That's my job. Reading a lot of articles and then try to summarize it for my readers and write this short newsletter. You can read it in 5 minutes, and then you can think it about. I hope so, and try to change your perspective about these topics, but also your behavior. Maybe I hope so.
The hope of someone who's writing every week and trying to inspire people to also take action. Nicolas, do you have any idea who are the people who are reading your newsletter, the type of profiles? Mm-hmm. Probably a mix of people, but can you tell us something about, do you have feedback from them?
Yeah, a lot of millennials people, so sort of my age, 20, 30 years old, but also many teachers that trying to understand better these topics and new ways to teaching the topics to the students, and a lot of young people also, not too much, but some of the Z generation so very young, high school, and also a lot of, for example, age of maybe my parents, so 50, 60, they are trying to keep up the pace, trying to understand new things, trying to do something new for the environment, because they are rethinking their existence, their impact. So a mix, but for especially the most part millennials.
Which is extremely interesting. Again, we've seen today lots of different ways of communicating the climate crisis to different type of audiences. Thank you, Nicolas Lozito, and congratulations again. And we will have the plaque for him. We will send it over. We will manage to get it to him. So it's now time to get into the announcement of the 3 finalists for the Rebecca Balestra Award, the Communication Award. We start with the first finalist, using Wikipedia to enhance global knowledge on climate change. We can see the project.
Wikipedia is one of the most visited websites in the world, with over 20 billion page views per month. But 2 years ago, the Climate Change in Africa article was mostly about malaria. So we set up a project to change that. Firstly, we brought together 30 African researchers to an in-person editathon to learn how to contribute their knowledge to Wikipedia. We then produced an all-encompassing guide for climate change professionals on how to edit Wikipedia, the first of its kind. We translated this guide into Spanish and held an editathon in Latin America. Finally, we held an editathon online for the whole of the Global South and brought together people from across 30 or more countries. Now, 2 years on, we've improved over 200 climate change-related articles on Wikipedia and empowered a community of people from the Global South to continue to add their information on climate change to one of the world's most visited websites.
So this was using Wikipedia to enhance global knowledge on climate change. Now we go to the second finalist, Climate Change in South Africa mini-series. Again, the presentation.
All over the world, people are starting to realize we're in a race against time as the planet heats up.
As everyone that is on this earth, we need to fight for what we are standing on.
In 2019, South Africa's leading satirical news voice, Politically Aware, joined the global movement to raise the alarm on the climate emergency. From youth clubs to film festivals to government workshops, our 3-part video explainer series makes climate change relatable and easy to understand.
Any climate change here means the Rooibos bush is in trouble.
No!
In a country of low climate literacy but an outsized carbon footprint, we are spreading awareness about the impacts, the carbon criminals, and the heroes fighting for a livable planet.
I felt compelled to do more as the youth and especially as a person of color.
A live roundtable discussion put youth voices in the spotlight, while our Xhosa language version gives access to 10 million more South Africans.
Stay away.
And now we go to the third finalist, Future Shoreline. And so these are the three finalists. Andrea, Andrea Maggiani here again from Carbon Sync to tell us who is the winner.
Okay, thanks for the honor. The winner is Future Shoreline.
Ooh. Future Shoreline. We should have Mike Favetta connected so that we can get the motivation. Hello, Mike.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'd like to start by saying congratulations to Future Shoreline. I'm Mike Favetta, the co-founder of Climate Without Borders and one of the judges in today's contest. And let me tell you, it was a very difficult decision, especially with all of the excellent projects that came through and were able to really be featured here for this Rebecca Balestra Award. I also want to thank all of the judges that helped out in the judging, especially as we went through and had a difficult time coming to our decision. But here's why we chose Future Shoreline. I am located right now in New Jersey, and while Future Shoreline was an exhibition based in Boston, this is an interesting and engaging combination of art and science. So this project is an innovative climate art installation that brings to attention not only to the threat of sea level rise, but also visualizes adaptation strategies as well as ways that can capture people's attention that are easy to understand for the general public. The top 3 categories that we selected, the top 3 projects, were all very good, but Future Shoreline really made and brought home the idea that this is an art project and Rebecca Balestra was an artist. So what best way to honor the award founder and why we have the award named for Rebecca than to give it to the best art representation for climate change communication. Future Shoreline is a global project. Although it is site-specific and displayed in a public space for all passers-by, it also reaches the global audience through photography, through videos, and various media echoing the project, some of which you just saw a few moments ago. Moreover, it is a social science research project that investigates the impacts and the installation of climate change adaptation perceptions and engagement to understand how we can all have an impact on real life. Finally, Future Shoreline meets the essential nature of the award and of Rebecca Balestra, the brilliant artist after whom it was named. I want to give you a quick mention that in seeing some of these projects, this one really stood out because the meteorologists from all across the world attended the 100th anniversary of the American Meteorological Society in Boston in January 2020, right before COVID. So all the meteorologists and climate scientists from around the world were centered in Boston for 1 week in late January, almost 2 years ago. And we were down in the waterfront, in the harbor front, right where this piece was. And it was very interesting to see how there's a lot of development and a lot of construction going down and happening at the harbor. And a lot of the meteorologists were saying, don't they know about climate change? Don't they know about sea level rise? So it was a very apparent and very good representation of what may happen in the future. And even going back, if you may know, the Mayflower ship that came from Europe 400 years ago, next month landed about 50 kilometers from Boston. And so what those settlers to the New World saw about 400 years ago, obviously is going to change very rapidly before our eyes. So a little going back to the past and seeing how the future shoreline will look. Congrats to the winners. It was an excellent project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike Favetta. And we should get now connected with the winners, Carolina Aragon and Ezra Markovits. Are you? Oh, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ezra. So, Carolina, would you like to say something?
Of course. Thank you so much. As the artist behind this project, this is such a joyous occasion to have the opportunity to, show the work around the world and to publicly thank the many, many people that made this project happen. No one got paid to do this really enough. No one had to do it, right? It was all done with the desire to do something good and to try new things. However, and I'm going to let my colleague Ezra speak in a little bit about the research. I think it's important for me to realize that right now I can feel very joyous to be here and to have the project recognized. But I think it's also important to recognize that there's sadness to this, because we are doing this for a reason that is very real, dealing with the threat of climate change, right? So it's coming from the heart, and dealing with those two feelings, concern and hope, is at the very center of this work, Future Shoreline. How do we show the threat and we show the work that the city of Boston is currently doing to adapt? How do we share both concern, right, and hope? So that is something that we did. We sought to do. We listened to city officials. We listened to residents who were concerned about development. And we dare to not just translate science, but use science to better understand the impact of our work. So with that, I want to let Professor Markowitz sort of share some of his part in this project.
Thank you, Carolina.
Thanks,
Ezra
Carolina.
Markowitz.
So first, I want to echo all of Carolina's gratitude and appreciation to the CMCC, to the award selection committee, and of course to our many, many partners and funders who made this collaboration possible. And I particularly would like to just call out Andrea Ma, without whom the research component just would not have happened. And for me, it's really gratifying to see this particular project be recognized with this award for a couple of reasons. First, Future Shoreline has been one of my own personal favorite collaborations over the 10 plus years that I've been working in the climate change communication research space. And in large part, I think that's because it was hard. In part because working with Carolina, who has a very different, not just a different vision and is incredibly creative, but is seeing the world in a different way and from a different perspective from myself as an artist and a scholar herself. It forced me to become more creative as a researcher, to really try and figure out how do we integrate the research and the art from the beginning and do it in a way that's meaningful and that also serves as potentially as a model for future work. And one of the challenges I think that we've faced, in addition to just COVID changing all of our plans at the last moment, right before it went into the water, was to try and figure out between the two of us and the rest of the research team, we had to get as much clarity as we possibly could about what it is that we thought the project might do to people, what it might do to their minds, to their hearts, to their actions, and what we might want it to do. And then to try and figure out how do we assess whether there's a match or a mismatch between those. And for me, again, it was a creative and iterative process to figure out how to do that in a way that I often don't have to do in my own kinds of climate change communication research. And so it was really gratifying to work on this, and of course to see it recognized, and especially to see Carolina's brilliance and creative vision recognized in this sort of way.
So thank you you both, Carolina and Ezra, for these words, also for explaining to us the process and the motivation that led you to develop a Future Shoreline, and again, congratulations for this. And I will, we're at the end, I'm leaving the stage again to Mauro Buonocore for the final
Okay, thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Congratulations again to Future Shoreline. Well, I think that we have time just for a few words to conclude, and to thank people that collaborated to this project, which is the first step of an idea. The idea, again, to collect and to put in connection the project and initiatives on climate change communication. You know that this kind of events, of hybrid events with in-person participation and online participation are quite complicated. So I want to thank all the partners, the institutional partners, again, Carbon Sync, Base for hosting us. And I want also thank the people that actively worked hardly to this event, Maura Tomei, Alessandra Mazzai, Ottavia Carlon, Selvaggia Santin, Renato Dalla Venezia, and all of them. So I think I want to thank all of you for being here and for following us in this first step of what I hope is a long journey. Thank you very much.